2024 was a great year for gaming. We saw the first Chinese AAA success in Black Myth Wukong. Silent Hill 2 had a fantastic remake, a much needed W for Silent Hill fans. Atlus released a new IP, Metaphor RE Fantasio, which proved that the studio could take the successful Persona formula into different settings and directions. On the indie scene, we had Balatro and Animal Well making splashes, demonstrating that smaller, high-quality experiences with vision can easily outdo the struggling AAA scene. There's a bunch of great stuff to play these days, and in the first month of 2025, I spent my time playing both newer titles and older classics. Here are 5 games I played that stood out to me that I want to rant about. First, we got Path of Exile 2. I love ARPGs. For me, there's something so satisfying about progressing a single character through collecting gear and skill points that I just can't get enough of. I sank over 1,000 hours in the first Path of Exile, but for as much as I enjoyed it, the first game became too bloated with seasonal league mechanics that, in my opinion, overcomplicated the game without really making the game fundamentally better. It seems like Grinding Gear Games also wanted to address this issue in the early access of PoE 2, as they have streamlined many of the systems to be more accessible without losing too much depth. The skill tree is simpler and much more user-friendly. Gone are gem links from armor. I found these updated mechanics to be much more approachable while still providing the build customizability PoE is known for. It is definitely a smoother onboarding experience for new players especially, which I think contributes a lot to PoE 2's massive Steam numbers. And it's so much fun! For me, the campaign itself is easily the best part, even though only 3 out of the 6 acts are released right now. The atmosphere is dark and moody, environments are detailed and beautiful. I found the content to be well paced and diverse throughout all of the acts. On the combat side of things, attacks in PoE 2 are much weightier than other ARPGs, which with the inclusion of the dodge roll, plays almost like a Souls-like at times. The slower combat took some time getting used to, but I think this is the right direction for the game. The more deliberate action creates more room for interacting with the enemies, making the moment-to-moment gameplay more engaging. There is definitely skill balancing and enemy balancing to be worked out over time, but this is already my favorite combat design in the genre. A big reason is how the combat enables PoE 2's strongest element, the boss fights. The boss fights in this game are the best in the entire genre, bar none. Their visual designs are menacing and full of character, completed with complex movesets that create dynamic gameplay. Moves are clearly telegraphed but are punishing, which demands more skill from the player. I particularly like one boss's attack where he recites a poem, and at the end of every line, he dashes at you to attack.
The eternal and pure, with bloodlust empowered.
A clever use of audio cues that made this boss fight very memorable. It's outstanding how many unique and quality bosses Grinding Gear Games has already crammed into this game, and I look forward to the new ones they have cooking in the oven. However, while I love the campaign, the endgame still needs some work. Gone is the deliberate, weighty combat, and back is the zoomy PoE 1 style of gameplay where you obliterate screens of monsters at a time. Monster damage seems to scale incredibly fast, while monster defenses aren't, which leads to binary gameplay where you either obliterate the monsters instantly or get one-shotted yourself. Dying becomes overly punishing, removing 10% of your level XP and deleting your Waystone, the items needed to generate the endgame levels. I hope GGG takes a look into reworking the system to be closer to the gameplay found in the campaign, as I think it is a slower, more methodical combat where PoE 2 will find its full potential. That being said, even in early access, PoE 2 still has hundreds, if not thousands of hours of fun, but I can't wait to see the game sharpen up for its full release. The next game I played is Metal Gear Solid 2. I'm only 24 years late to the party, but having finally finished the game last week, I can say that to no one's surprise, this is a classic for a reason. I can definitely see why it was so impactful back in 2001 and still has so many fans. It's hard to describe, but this isn't just a stealth game. This is a narrative uniquely constructed for video games, and it is wild. Political conspiracies, international security, social engineering, meta commentary on a relationship with media, MGS2 goes into some pretty crazy territory with its ambitious script. I thought I knew the major twists going into the game, but this was a wacky rollercoaster of ideas and deep themes I didn't see coming. Some of the storytelling methods Kojima employs here were absolutely groundbreaking at the time, and the ripples of influence this started can be seen in more recent works such as Bioshock, Nier, and The Last of Us Part 2. That said, in typical Kojima fashion, there are a lot of cutscenes. The playtime is probably something like 50% cutscenes and 50% gameplay, and for as much as I enjoy the codec dialogue, sometimes I wish the gameplay sections took a little bit more of the playtime. Gameplay-wise, the stealth is still fun, but it honestly hasn't aged the best compared to more recent stealth titles. Enemy AI was a cut above the competition back in 2001, but it's jarring in 2025 to see soldiers barely react to live rounds being shot. Detection is just based around a vision cone that you have to navigate around, which is on the simpler side compared to Splinter Cell's light mechanics or the dynamic gameplay in Dishonored. The weapons and gadgets do add some variety to your options, but careful movement combined with the tranquilizer gun did the job just fine 90% of the time. Most frustrating though are the many instant game over moments. Tripping on hard to see explosives is game ending. Slipping on bird poop is game ending. Getting spotted is often game ending. Thankfully, checkpoints are very generous, but these instant fail moments do hurt the game's pacing. The controls too are quite clunky in 2025. Aiming is done by holding the right bumper and using the left stick to adjust the camera, which is uncomfortable. You also have to constantly switch between the locked overhead third-person view and first-person aiming view, which can be disorienting. For the first 2 hours of the game, I was constantly wishing for a more standard third-person behind-the-back camera with dual-stick controls, but eventually I got the controls under my fingers. Despite those nitpicks though, I still had a great time with the gameplay once I got used to the mechanics. I enjoyed the item-based progression that felt similar to Metroidvania's. Obtaining the sniper rifle, SOCOM pistol, and other gadgets felt rewarding as I grew my arsenal against the oppressive opposition. Boss fights too had some clever mechanics that I found to work pretty well with the game's combat. And in general, like other great stealth games, you often have to make quick decisions between sneaking, attacking, or fleeing, which kept the gameplay dynamic and fresh. The scenarios and level design too do a great job at facilitating the fantasy of being a one-man army with the odds stacked against you. But more than anything, it is the story that is the main reason many fans play MGS games, and Metal Gear Solid 2 still delivers today. This is a twisting, ambitious plot that plays with player expectations. Everyone at this point knows about the infamous character switch in Raiden, but the game's meta-commentary on topics such as social engineering, AI, and the control of information caught me off guard in the best way possible. Seeing how now we live in a world of ChatGPT and fake content, MGS2 somehow feels even more relevant today than it ever did, and shows how far Kojima was ahead of his time on his read on people's relationship with information. There are some weird, goofy moments that will be hit or miss for some players, but as a whole, the story was easily the best part of the game for me, especially how Kojima connects the game's themes to real-world phenomena. We are seeing MGS3 receive the remake treatment later this year, but I would love to see the second game be modernized for newer audiences. Third on my list, we have Mouthwashing, a surprise indie hit that kind of came out of nowhere. It got on my radar due to the crazy high rating on Steam, and being a fan of horror, I quite like this one. I don't think I'm the biggest fan, but this is a solid narrative-driven indie experience that uses clever storytelling tricks to tell a compelling horror story. The PS1 style graphics and unique setting are instant draws into the world, but it's the creative non-linear progression of the story that kept me playing until the end. You take control of members of a transport crew stranded on a ship in space, jumping to different parts of the timeline and seeing the events unfold from different perspectives. It plays like a walking simulator without intense gameplay, but the way the environments transform and betray expectations makes even walking down the same hallway for the 5th time an engaging moment, as you're never too sure what creepy detail the game will throw at you next. In fact, repetition is the storytelling element that I think Mouthwashing uses best. You'll get very familiar with the spaceship's layout, but with every perspective change and time shift throughout the game, the little changes to the environment become jarring and noteworthy. Hidden within those details is a good chunk of the story that is left to the player's own deduction to figure out, which adds to the immersion and mystery. It delivers its story beats using experimental presentation that feels fresh from common horror tropes. Personally, I just wish that there was more of a gameplay element, as the horror loses some of its edge once you realize that there really are no consequences for quote-unquote dying. Overall though, this is a great indie experience that understands its own scope and vision that's well worth the look if the visuals and premise interest you. The newest game I played in January is Ender Magnolia, a Metroidvania game that is the sequel to the highly rated Ender Lilies. Now honestly, I really couldn't get into the first game. Something about the art style and exploration didn't really jive with what I was looking for in a Metroidvania, but I found myself quite hooked on this sequel. We play as Lilac, a mysterious young girl who has the ability to purify homunculi, robotic enemies of the game, and summon them to use their abilities. Right away, the color palette is much more varied than the first game. Environments are more memorable thanks to clearly defined visual elements and mechanics. I had a good time wandering through the different maps, simply enjoying the background art and letting myself be immersed in the atmosphere. As for the combat, I think it's pretty solid, but a step below Hollow Knight or Metroid Dread. Attacks feel decent in their speed and weight, but enemy hitboxes leave much to be desired. It's often unclear what part of the enemy's body can damage you, and the actual hitbox sizes of the enemy attacks don't seem to match the animation. For example, in this boss fight, we have this guy rolling a huge boulder. I think most players and myself would instinctually think that the boulder itself is an active hitbox the entire time, but it turns out that it only damages you during an attack animation, which feels a little unintuitive in how it was conveyed. Thankfully, the telegraphy makes up for some of the hitbox shortcomings and is quite good for the most part. That, combined with the various abilities you can mix and match at your disposal, fighting does have a good amount of depth in your itemization, move selection, and recognizing attack patterns. But where Metroidvania games make or break is in their progression, and I'm happy to say that Ender Magnolia does a great job at enticing the player to seek the next cool ability, the next cool boss, or the next cool area. As good Metroidvanias do, the game often teases you with inaccessible locks that you need to come back to after obtaining the next ability. It is satisfying to increase your movement options and figuring out what new areas you can explore next. This is a nice, fun Metroidvania that has a sense of whimsicalness and wonder that I find gripping. I hope to finish this one in the next coming weeks. Finally, I wound up January by playing some of the Warcraft 3 campaign, which I never finished when I was younger. And it's surprisingly refreshing. The RTS genre really hasn't gotten much love since MOBAs took over the industry, so revisiting this one almost felt like playing a new game. I know, Warcraft Reforged has a billion issues and is a massive disappointment to many fans. I definitely wish the remastering got more love and features, but just speaking about the original campaign itself, it still has that old school Blizzard charm. The iconic fantasy art style, dark story beats, satisfying mechanics, a strong cast of characters, and best of all, no live service nonsense or microtransactions. It's just a pure RTS experience from front to back. The game in its original form is clearly made out of passion for the vision, and it shows. Arthas' fall from grace is fascinating to watch unfold, and the voice work holds up surprisingly well. The campaign missions are well designed from the ones I've played so far, ranging from offensive focused missions, base defending, and a mix of both. There are some remnants of older RTS controls, like only being able to select 12 units at a time, but for me this only added to the game's 2000s charm. Like other old Blizzard games, they nailed the game feel here. Attacks and sound effects feel satisfying. Combat is slower than other RTS games like StarCraft, which fits the more focused hero-led squad gameplay and allows you to focus on microing your units. Units themselves have interesting designs with clear strengths and weaknesses, as expected of a quality RTS. It still plays so well. However, that makes me all the more disappointed with recent Blizzard as they continue to make out-of-touch, visionless decisions in Overwatch 2 and Diablo 4. There is clear, corporate-led design in their latest titles that only serve to make money instead of creating immersive experiences, which they were once famous for. I think I'll still be dreaming of a Warcraft 4 or a StarCraft 3 made by the old Blizzard magic 10 years from now. At least playing through Warcraft 3 has been a blast, and it's great that the old classics are still available for fans and new players to relive the glory days. And that wraps up my games that defined my January. Despite all the discourse around microtransactions, pay to win, and Ubisoft disappointment, I think the rising success of AA and the indie scene has put gaming in a pretty good spot. I'm having a great time with the games I've chosen lately, but what have you been playing these days? Newer or retro titles? Leave your top games from January in the comments below. See you in February.